go down and shadows fall. Welcome to a world of mysteries, of conspiracies, of hidden and forgotten knowledge. There's a world more strange, more frightening, and more fascinating than most people ever imagined or dared to contemplate. Your parents, your teachers, never told you the whole story, either out of ignorance or fear. Your politicians may know, but they keep their mouths shut. The door is opening. Throw off your chains and blinders, arm yourselves with the truth, and take a walk along the razor-sharp precipice of the Outer Edge.
That's right. This is The Outer Edge. I'm Tim Swartz. With me tonight is my co-host, Mike Montz. Mike, how you doing tonight?
Doing fine, Tim. Doing fine. How are you?
Bad, not too bad. And, of course, as always, on, let's see, I think it's the second
Sunday.
Second Sunday of the month.
Right.
We have Mr. UFO, Tim Beckley, with us as well. Tim, how are you tonight?
Well, I'm anxious as ever to get going. I've got great little tales of terror here. How the conference, Contact in the Desert, is being sabotaged by Mothman. Now, would you believe that? And
okay, well, first, why don't you tell us what Contact in the Desert is?
Okay. Well, now, my friend Skylar, who runs the Western Fortean UFO group, right?
Right?
She lives in the Los Angeles area. She's was going down there this weekend to set up a shop to be part of this great event. Now, last year, I believe they drew in the neighborhood of about 600 or 700 people. They have many of the top names in the, what would we call it? UFO, some people might say sideshow. These are the big names, the controversial names, the people that you hear on coast to coast all the time. David Wilcox, Stephen Greer. And so it seems to be an exciting event, and Skylar was very anxious to go down there and, in fact, report to us live on the air here tonight. But I knew that probably was not going to happen because the conference is taking place at the Meta Center, which is in or near Joshua Tree, California, in the middle of the desert. Well, if you've ever been down there, it really is the middle of the desert.
Yeah.
It's about 12 miles as the crow. I don't know if there's a crow out there, but as the crows fly from the old Giant Rock Airport, and it's the center of much UFO activity. It's the Mojave Desert is basically what it is. And in the afternoon, you better be inside and under the biggest rock you can find because the temperature will go up to about probably 110 or so.
Oh, but that's a dry heat,
Well, dry heat or not. Anyway, I kind of predicted or thought that probably Skylar would not get through to us. She has a cell phone, but it's not one of the big corps. It's one of the smaller cell phone companies, and they don't have that many towers. I was hoping that she would borrow somebody else's phone. But again, it's in the middle of nowhere, and you can tell why George Van Tassel probably was the only thing he could communicate with under the rock would be Ashtar by mental telepathy because it's way out there. In fact, some people, I remember when I was out there years ago, people walk around in the daytime with umbrellas over their head, to keep the sun from striking them. Some people even wear long sleeves. I would die. And, of course, Bill Shatner had his supposed UFO contact in the desert while he was riding his motorcycle in that neighborhood, and the bike stalled. Well, it's in my book, and now he denies that the incident took place. Anyway, we're not hearing from Skylar because apparently the conference has had the whammy put on it.
Really?
Andy Calvin, who is a UFO, I was going to say wannabe, but I don't want to be that rude, UFO publisher, and claims to have seen Mothman. Apparently is the new Ted Owens, and I guess he can control nature and things like the electrical power. Because according to Andy, and this was posted on his Facebook just a little while ago, he says apparently the contact in the desert the Contact in the Desert Spook Conference is having a hard time with little disasters such as lost power, etc. Keep focusing people, and maybe we will get these charlatans off the airwaves. Now, I assume he's referring to maybe George Norrie, but then again, he has been a guest on the show, so I don't see why he would say that, because that's the show of record you want to get on if you're going to be a wannabe UFO publisher.
Yeah.
Then he says, our team made up of authentic Mothman witnesses has already turned the event into mush. Apparently, they've made the power go out across the county.
Hey, I have a question, Tim.
Yes.
How do you put together a team of Mothman witnesses? Wouldn't almost all the Mothman witnesses by now be
deceased?
Yeah.
Yes, either deceased or in their 80s, and I doubt if they're going to spend their time trying to put the whammy on Contact in the Desert, having never heard of any of these people. The whole thing is just totally preposterous, but I think Andy is looking for a lot of attention these days. Anyway, Skylar's not with us, and the event is not being reported on, but I'm sure we'll hear from her and others as to what happened. Now, last year at Contact in the Desert, I think the big controversial event was, Stephen Greer walks around with a bodyguard.
I heard about that.
Yes, okay. And fellas, while he was giving his talk, the bodyguard was preventing people from coming in and out of the conference hall. Now, again, I wasn't there. I didn't see it. I'm just reporting on it. And
Did his bodyguard look like a big black owl-looking creature?
Well, I'll have to find out. But, I have to say, people do criticize Stephen Greer, and I realize he has a huge ego, much bigger than the head of that little creature that he presumes is an extraterrestrial, which is the silliest thing I've ever heard of. I did see the movie, actually, last night, Cyrus, I believe it's called, and it's an excellent movie, and he has done some good. Anything, to me, that keeps the subject, in the front of the public and keep hammering at Uncle Sam's door is good with me. I mean, I have no objections to that. He can inflate his ego all he wants. I got a big air pump in the back here for anybody who requests it.
Yeah, they're, I suppose, like any other subject there, the UFO field does tend to have a few people with inflated egos.
Well, it's a colorful field.
Well, it is. And people who say, oh, it's because of all these flakes that no scientists are interested in it. It's poppycock. No scientists are interested in it because of their peers. And they're afraid of rocking the boat because they've gone to college, spent all of the universities and MIT and all these places, and all of a sudden they're going to have to say that everything that they've learned and they taught everybody else is a bunch of hogwash? No, it has nothing to do with the when you say charlatans, people say, oh, George Adamsky and all these contactees were in it for the money. They never made any money. George Adamsky and all these guys traveled around the country in the Greyhound bus with tickets that were provided by associates and promoters and things like that. I don't know. It is what UFOs are, what they are, and we can sit here all night and beat our chest about it and tell you what we think about it, and it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter because UFOs do what they want to do, not what we want them to do.
Well, I was thinking, Tim. What was that documentary? Was it Farewell, Dear Space Brothers?
Oh, terrible! One of the worst things that any could possibly do.
But some of the contactees that were being interviewed, I mean, they were elderly at the time, and you could tell that they were not living in the life of luxury.
Oh my God!
I mean, they didn't become rich off of.
Well, can you imagine? Well, Tim, we reprinted George Adamski's Pioneers from Space, right? We almost didn't. I paid like $600 for a copy of that rare book, and when I
Right.
got it, it turned out that 16 pages were missing, and
Right.
16 pages were duplicated in the book. Right? There was a signature an extra signature, and it was and one of them was missing. Okay, so what did we do in order to get this back into print? We had to go and borrow a copy from the Library of Congress, and Tim, at that time, I think you were working in a library, so they sent it to you.
Right. Well, actually,
Right.
it was the Indiana University
Yes.
Library Archives that had
Yes.
had a copy of
Oh,
it.
was
And
it
right.
that? Okay. Yeah.
Right.
But if it
Well, and they
wasn't-
were
if it-
the only ones.
Wow.
Well, actually,
Well,
you know, Tim.
I think there's one in the Library of Congress in
Tim,
in
you know,
Washington.
you actually you may be right, and
Yes.
that it was the Library of Congress, but it was through the Indiana University.
That's right. That it went to. I think they sent
library.
it to them. Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think they sent it to them on a loaner.
Yeah, and then they sent it to me.
So what did you guys?
Correct.
How
Yeah,
did
yeah.
you guys get a decent copy of the pages? I mean, you couldn't really scan it without hurting the binding of the book, could you? Did you take photographs? What did you do?
That's exactly what I did. I took
Yeah.
I took photographs of it, and then from those photographs, I
Yeah.
was able to run it through an OCR.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you know, that book was self-published, so he certainly did. And can you imagine what? I think the book came out in 1946 or something like that.
Yeah.
Can you imagine what self-publishing would have been like in those days? It's not all that it's cracked up to be these days, but at least you can scan the book and put it up on Amazon or something. But boy, that must have been hell in a wheelbarrow to put that thing out. And look at that. I got one copy. I didn't pay the $700 for it. There were a couple other copies that were available for $700. I went for $400, and I guess I got for what I paid for because 16 pages were missing.
How long ago was this that you guys did this?
I don't know, about 5 years ago now, Tim, you think?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
And we polished that book up. We found out that Adamsky, thanks to Zamora, the torture king there, he
Who has
found
been
some-
on our show, by the way?
Oh yeah.
Oh, I know. He's a good friend of. I see him every time he comes here and performs at Coney Island or some other venue, eating his bottles of beer and electric bulbs and all that other great stuff. Tim Carlin, yeah, Tim. Another
Tim
Tim.
Quinlan.
Yeah, another Tim. Boy, we got more Tims in this field than you can shake a stick at. That's a synchronicity by
That is
itself.
true.
You know? Yeah.
Tim.
In fact, I just found out that the Tim that runs UFO TV, his birthday is the same as mine. Not the same year, but July 13. So Tim, he's Tim Crawford.
Another
We
cancer.
ought to have a conference sometime of just UFO Tims.
It
anyways,
might be just
so-
the three of us then.
But anyway, so the Pioneers of Space, we put a lovely new cover on it. We added a lot of material, including a newspaper clipping from like 1935, showing that Adamsky was interested in the New Age concepts even then. He was
Right.
going to set up a group with a pyramid and back, and they would have organizational meetings. He claimed that he spent his childhood in Tibet, which we know is a total lie. I mean, he certainly was never in Tibet in his entire life, but he did have the Royal Order of Tibet for a while, and he had kind of an Eastern philosophy before he had his contact in the desert. So it's appropriate appropriate that we're talking about that, because his was the first real contact in the desert, if it took place, which we think that it did, because George Hunt Williamson picked the spot because he got a message through the Ouija board, which is
Right.
what's something the Adamsky people do not want anybody to know, because everything that
Right.
happened to Adamsky is supposed to have been physical. Well, it
Right.
wasn't.
Exactly. And isn't there a certain device in the area?
The
Is there a
integratron.
certain?
The integratron.
Oh,
Yes.
that's found in Landers. Yes, that
Yeah.
was George Van Tassel's time capsule or time
So,
machine.
Tim, do you think maybe the integratron was motivated by Mothman's BO and it drained all the energy out of the convention this
Well,
weekend?
actually, I've heard rumors that Nikola Tesla was supposed to have helped with the plans, but that's impossible because Nikola Tesla would have been deceased before the integratron was built. But that's one of the legends. And I do understand from people. Now, I've been on the outside of the integratron because Daniel Boone and Van Tassel's grandson live in the neighborhood there in trailers parked around the back, but they don't have the key to get into the integratron. They're not allowed in, I guess, because it was sold to somebody else. And they've had meetings in there. You can rent it for meetings, and they have acoustical sound healings and things in there. It's a wonderful building. It's like no other. There's not one nail in it, and it's acoustically almost perfect. And maybe it would rejuvenate you if you walked in one side of the building and out the other. It's one of the.
I have heard stories.
It's one of the few things that the Space Brothers gave to us.
I have heard stories, though, from people who have been in the integratron and have experienced rather, unusual physical reactions.
Yes.
I don't remember exactly what it was.
Did it last longer than 4 hours, and did they have to contact a medical professional?
I think you got the wrong device there.
I started to say, if anybody thought that would actually do that, there would be a line all the way to Nevada for that one. Well, and gentlemen, I should point out that when we did republish Adamsky's old book, that we had his byline right on the cover. It was not omitted. It was said, written by George Adamsky.
Yeah.
Well, you have to have the original writer's byline on the cover, and it's also good to get permission from the author or his heirs and assigns.
Well, I think in George Adamsky's case, we don't have any problems there. Although it's kind of funny, there is a George Adamsky Foundation that claims copyright on everything except for that because, first of all, they don't want anybody to know that the book exists. And it goes way back before copyright would have, long since expired. In fact, it's kind of funny. They stamped some of these old Adamsky photographs that have been printed in every book imaginable without any copyright notice because Adamsky sent them out and sold them at his, the Palomar gift shop or something like that. The bell-shaped craft, they stamp on their copyright George Adamsky, the foundation, and I'd like to see them prove that one in court. So there you go.
There you go.
And we've got a heck of a show lined up tonight. We got a heck of a show lined up here tonight.
Who's our guest tonight, Tim?
Well, it's Harry Drew, and he is a historian, and he is an expert on the UFO crash at Kingman, Arizona. Now, this is one of the crashes that supposedly took place in the early days of ufology. It was after Roswell, and it was following also the one that Scully writes about in his book. There were Aztec, right? There were quite a few. There were quite a few UFO crashes reportedly taking place in California and New Mexico and Arizona around that time. Kingman is one of the lesser ones. I've read up on it over the years, but I didn't really remember too much about it. Now, what I do remember is about 10 or more years ago, my friend Penny and I were on Route 66, just kind of tooling around on a very warm day in Arizona. Every day is warm in Arizona.
I started to say every day is warm in Arizona.
Summertime. Anyway, we got off. We just pulled off of Route 66, and there was a Dairy Queen along the way there, which I've stopped at a few times. And there are numerous what I call trading posts, gift shops we would call them, where you can go in and buy turquoise jewelry, meteorite fragments, tumblestones, paintings of Doc Holliday and numerous Kachina dolls. So a lot of tourists stop into these places along the road, and of course there are collectors for these items. Well, there was a trading post off to our right as we pulled off Route 66. I do not remember the name of the place. I did get a business card, but it has been lost in the shuffle over the years. So we went into the trading post, looked around. I don't really think we were going to buy anything. We'd already bought some stuff at the Indian Reservation as it was, but we decided let's stop in and see if we can get maybe a couple little knickknacks for the relatives back home. And we got to talking to the manager, maybe the owner of the store. I don't know exactly what his credentials were. It was a pretty big place, one large room and then one room on the side. And we happened to mention that we were checking out ghost stories and we're interested in UFOs and stuff. And he said, well, you see this side room over here? He says, there are spirits of Indians that appear from time to time, and objects move around, and people have witnessed them, and then they have disappeared. You know, they'll turn around, and the Native American will be gone. And he told us a couple of stories. I don't remember the exact detail. Then he said, you know, there was a UFO crash around here many years ago. And I said, yes, I heard that there was. And he said, well, you know, I have photographs. And I said, you have photographs? Now, I don't remember the exact details, but it seems that either he or his brother, or maybe the two of them, somehow got into possession of these pictures of a crashed UFO that had landed in the desert. Now, I do believe that Harry will correct me, because I believe he claims that the object did not crash, it landed. But that's one of the things that we will discuss this evening. So now I asked the fellow, well, where's the photographs? Can we see them? You know, I wanted to get a hold of them. Of course, what a scoop that would be! What a scoop that would be, right? And he said, oh, I have them in a safe place in case something happens to me. You know, it was one of these dreadful, like, you know, I have to look around my shoulder type of things all the time. And he said, if I remember correctly, that the photos were somewhere else, maybe in Washington State or Oregon, but please don't start a stampede. Because I know there are some guys out there who will grab any opportunity to find a photograph and say, you know, investigate it or say this is legitimate. Anyway, that's the story. And, of course, we said that we would check back on him or, you know, get back to him on this. I think at the time I was thinking maybe introducing him to Stanton Freeman and trying to get Stan interested in the case, because I think the Kingman, Arizona story was always ridiculed as being a total hoax. But this evening, as we will find out, it may not be.
Well, I mean, that's one of those stories that you hear all the time. I mean, somebody says, you know, oh, we got, you know, photographs that, you know, will blow the lid off of everything, and that's all you hear. I mean, you never see the photographs, or that's...
Well, you know, years ago, I did a book on MJ-12, The Riddle of Hangar 18, and recently I did an update on this, the case for UFO crashes from urban legend to reality. There are so many cases of UFO crashes that I have collected over the years. Now, of course, the main researcher into this field was Leonard Stringfield, who, of course, is deceased now, but he put out a number of very well thought-out publications devoted to this subject. And, you know, it's almost like a ghost story. You can't get rid of them. There are UFO crashes just about everywhere. In fact, in the case of the UFO crashes that I did, there's even an incident that supposedly took place in New York City's Central Park, where a piece of a UFO was shot down by the military. So it's an urban legend. It's like the Phantom Hitchhiker. You can't get rid of them, and some stories have a little bit more documentation than others, but they are there for us to explore and decide for ourselves whether they're legitimate or not.
Well, you know, the one that always fascinated. Go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say it goes back into antiquity. These tales of strange objects falling from the sky and possible evidence, you know, left of these things. And below the oceans and on mountaintops and everywhere else. So it's not a new thing.
Now, the one that always fascinated me was the one that supposedly crashed there on Long Island, there in the I think it was like in a state park.
Well, wasn't that close to North Haven Research Lab or whatever it is?
Yeah, North Haven Laboratories. Well, I mean, that one UFO researcher that I think
John
he wrote.
Ford.
Did he write an article about that for, was it UFO
Universe?
Or,
Well, no, I'm not sure he wrote the article, but somebody did, because he has been incarcerated in a mental institution for many, many years. He threatened to poison one of the members of the city, let's say, council or something like that. So,
allegedly threatened.
Allegedly. Mm-hmm.
I've heard stories that he was set up. Supposedly, I mean,
he was railroaded or something.
Railroaded, yeah. And I mean, supposedly for what he allegedly was going to try to do. I mean, he has been in that institute for
forever.
Forever. I mean, I've seen people who have mass murdered their relatives get out of jail quicker.
For sure, yes. Well, Maria D'Andrea, who is our psychic, our friendly psychic, who's been on the show, her webmaster is a fellow, and I'm embarrassed to say I can't remember his name, and he has his own podcast, and he's in touch with John Ford and talks about this all the time, and I guess they're trying to get him released. Like you say, he's been in there well over 20 years. It's just like, by this time, you would think that the city council member has moved on to other things. I don't know.
Well, Tim, why don't we go to our first break, and then when we come back, we'll continue this conversation with our guest Harry True. That sound good to everyone?
Yay!
Sounds great, man.
All right. So this is Tim Swartz. You are listening to The Outer Edge.
And we're joined by Harry Drew. Just going to tell us something about some UFO crashes and some other related matters. Harry, how are you doing? And welcome to The Outer Edge.
I'm doing very well. Good evening. How are you?
Good. We're doing great. So you, I was looking at your bio, and I see that you've been not only involved in UFO research, but in a lot of other interesting topics like historical stuff, anthropology, archaeology, and things of this nature. And I guess you've kind of seen some overlap with ufology in those fields over the years.
The overlap for me is history.
Right.
I'm a former museum director of history, anthropology, and archaeology, museums, plural, and all of the things that naturally means involving excavations, digs, and preservation, collection, exhibition of whatever we find that can be brought out, that type of thing. And right. I've been writing history for about 40 years, various things. This is history.
Well, Harry, why don't we start at the beginning now? This is Tim Beckley here. There were, of course, a number of UFO incidents in Arizona and New Mexico in the late 40s and the early 50s. We know a lot about Roswell, or at least we think we do. And, of course, there was the incident also at Aztec that Frank Scully, the writer for Variety, the entertainment newspaper, was involved in. And then there's the lesser-known case at Kingman, Arizona, which is what you have been involved in. Now, just before you came on the air, I told about my little episode of having gone into the trading post and meeting this fellow who apparently says he was involved in the case and took some photographs and hid them away and so forth. But I never really knew too much about the incident. In fact, I was going through my own UFO crash book from Legends to Reality, and I realized there wasn't even anything in there on Kingman. Why don't you tell us about it? What happened and when did it happen?
Let me tell you first, if you think about the fact that there hasn't been much said about Kingman, and what there has been said, and I can illustrate that for you as we go along. There's been a lot said about it within certain circles and it's contradictory to facts that I've been able to uncover. But the other thing is, one of the reasons there hasn't been a lot said about Kingman is because it's real. And that was one of the things that stood out to me about year 4 in my research on this. What is it about? It's about what I call 7 days in May, 1953, and it's from May 18, May 22, and May 24. I did not expect to find anything other than I was trying to determine, had there or had there not been a UFO crash in May of 1953, kind of general, because there was a gazillion little anecdotes about that happening, and it did happen. It was real. It was not real. That type of thing. And I began to do things to interview some of the local old-timers. I live here. It gives me an advantage. That's why I could spend so much time in the desert and that type of thing. And some very interesting things came to my attention, including interviewing the last surviving member of the United States Air Force retrieval team. Also, a museum curator friend who had gained information in the confidence of a gentleman I can't give you a name with, but I talk about that in Hidden in Plain Sight, the Kingman UFO crashes, and this particular gentleman became an ordained minister, and using that as somewhat of a shield from being involved with the church and state problem, interviewed, or counseled, I should say, Area 51 workers back then. Interesting. And that is how I got site number 2. The first site was described to me by the Air Force man, amongst others, and originally this came out in April 1973 in a little line in a multi-column news article in the Middlesex Daily News in Massachusetts, Sudbury, Massachusetts. It was in the newspaper, and that's been story told multiple different ways, and the newspaper, sent me the reel of microfilm so I could read the paper myself, because it has been corrupted in stories. If you go online and other places, it's in printed books and different things. And there's all kinds of things that are quoted from the paper that aren't in the paper. And so I needed to see it, because that's part of what I do. I use accredited research facilities. I look at law enforcement records. I look inside of documentation at research libraries and museums. I go to places where they've already done things to keep the material relatively clean and uncorrupted, so that I have a little better chance of reading about what's fact rather than what somebody thought maybe happened. And that makes a big difference. That's a real problem here. This is what I've found. And I have not researched things like Aztecs, and I haven't researched Roswell. I was told Roswell constituted a crash, and the debris field was 1 square mile with pieces about the size of your hand. And then later I was told, well, there was another crash. And then I was told there was another one. So I don't know, But I can't see how you would ever find. I'm a realist. I'm a student of history while I'm living it, and I am also a historian where I've lectured on a number of expertise areas, including ancient Egypt, where I have taught in universities, this type of thing. And so I looked at some of these things, and there was some inconsistencies, and the only other way to do it is I do not use the internet. I do not use the internet. It's highly unreliable.
Yes.
Okay? And so I was like, seat of the pants. I'm out tramping across deserts, climbing mountains. I do this, and I've done this for quite some time completely by myself. There's risk involved. There are 11 poisonous creatures out of the 15 for the state of Arizona that live in Mojave County. And I was right out with them all the time, and that kind of thing. And it's like, that's important for people to know before you head off, or you can't just drive off across the desert. You'll drive off into a wash, 35 feet deep, and nobody will see you for a year or two, that type of thing. So there's some things involved. But Raymond Fowler, who is a researcher from back east in Massachusetts, picked up on this newspaper article that talked about a man who had gone to examine a spaceship. And it was from a story from a 15-year-old boy who was writing a book for youth. And right in the newspaper, in spite of all the stories out there, he'd worked on it 6 months. That's right from what he's saying, doing the feature in the paper. And Raymond Fowler had a clipping service, something we don't see anymore. But, it's physically somebody clips it out of the newspaper and they send it on to you. And he got this, and that proceeded for him to do something that I can't even imagine. He called the man, got an appointment to meet with him. The man's name was Arthur Stansel. Last name, I'm going to tell you because there's been an argument for 30 years about the man spells his name wrong. It's Stansel. And I'm not kidding you. It's even in books where they say, well, this guy spelled his name. He's been spelling his name wrong. And it's it's like, this is really the guy's name. So he interviewed the guy. The man worked at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for 12 years before he was sent out to be part of Operation Upshot, Knothole. That's the atomic bomb tests in Nevada, just outside of Las Vegas, not about 97 miles. And he was, in essence, what we would call the bomb blast effect analyst for the nuclear weapons. And he was notified by his boss one evening, on the 20th of May, that he was to go to Indian Springs Air Force Base, which wasn't too far from where he was, the next day, and board a plane and be flown to Phoenix, and they're going to be sending him to look at something. And this is the story that Raymond Fowler got. He did impeccably good work. I wish at this point in time he'd have come on out here and gotten on the ground to do the follow-up work. And it's like I'm running from 1973. I started in 2006, and from 1973 a lot of time went by, and that covers up a lot of clues, and which made my work go longer than it would ordinarily. But he was completely correct. He verified Arthur Stansel was for real. He had a top-secret rating in spite of some people saying he didn't. If you can imagine, he was witness to 3 atomic bomb blasts, and he's out there doing stuff that you see in the photos where the buildings blow over and the trees fall down and trucks roll around. He was involved in all of that. And they were testing to see what these things could do. And so, yes, he had all these clearances. And he was sent to Phoenix. He boarded a bus, a Model 3301, General Motors, U.S. Army bus. There were 840 of them made. The driver's name was Dennis. And they drove. There were scientists already waiting there. About 15 technicians or specialists, including himself, were flown to Phoenix. They boarded the bus. The windows were taped out with tape to black out the side windows so they couldn't see out, supposedly to help them not know where they were going. They still had the windows partially open because of tobacco smoke, no air conditioning, not necessarily horrifically hot. This was on the 21st day of May. Everybody out there would have to have a pencil writing all these things down, 18, 20, 21. The craft, for reasons that I understand, went down in a forced landing on 18 May. It was witnessed by 15 residents, and they called it a flying disc, and it went down, and it went, after it was disrupted in its flight, it went 7.62 miles before it made a landing in a low, wide drain field on packed sand with water 4 inches below the surface in May. Trust me, I've been out there. I've done tests to find out how it is like right now in August, the difference. I pulled my Jeep out onto it, and sure enough, I had a wheel start sinking. And they were estimating, for him, he was to estimate the impact speed. They couldn't understand why the craft wasn't damaged. Not damaged. And I'm saying that so everybody understands. If you look this up anywhere online, you'll find it was shot down by a rocket. It had a bomb inside that went off. All kinds of different things happened to this craft when, in fact, there wasn't a dent or even a scratch on the vehicle. And the story from the Air Force man about the retrieval team arrived here 2 hours after it made a forced landing. It settled in the...
Can you tell us, give us a little bit more description of what the craft looked like? Was it a typical disc like we see in the science fiction movies?
Can I tell you what again?
Exactly what it looked like, the craft.
Sure. It was the outside surface of the craft looked like buffed, dull aluminum color. Don't misunderstand that I just said it was aluminum. I didn't say that. To look at it for us looked like it was buffed aluminum, not chrome. Okay? It was Saturn-shaped, and they say it's like these were in the 1936 Mussolini papers. I don't know anything about that. All I know is that from the drawing done by the eyewitness who touched this thing, it was clamshell. It had like, it was 30 feet in diameter, about 5 feet in from the lip on each side. There was about a 20-foot width. It was circular in shape, although it's been said to be oval. It, on the outer edge, had slots all the way around the rim. The metal was blue-black around the slots, like they were affected by heat. This was an atmospheric craft, referred to at the time as a scout craft, a shuttle. This was not an interplanetary vehicle. This went to like an aircraft carrier. Okay? And where it was headed, it was coming on the flight path that's here, still here. They still are here. And it was flying from the north to the south. All three were coming from the north, headed south, because there was reputed to be an underground base about 32 miles down south of where this thing went down. That's as far as I'll go as far as describing the area.
Okay. Harry, I need to ask you, because this is kind of jiving with other things we've talked about with guests before. And now, when you said there's an underground base in the area, we have another friend and guest who's been on several times who allegedly had his father was involved in a firefight with some of these same beings in that underground base or another nearby base, and his dad told him this was absolutely true. And here's my question: are these, according to this guy's father, they're basically a form of human? They don't look like us. They're not exactly Homo sapiens, but they're a related species. Is that what you got out of this?
Are you talking about the crew?
The crew of the ship, yes.
Yeah, I can tell you how it was explained to me by the last living member of the retrieval team, who has since passed away.
Okay.
When he told me the story, and he was, and let's see, I think about 85 at that point, and very bright, wasn't suffering from any known mental disorder. In fact, he had mentioned, by the way, some things that nobody paid any attention to, but I did, and that's how I found it. But the landing site. But what he saw, he's a young airman. He's with the retrieval team. It's new. This is what they are there to go and recover down discs. And out of breath, he tells me that when they arrived The craft is sitting at about a 15-degree angle where it's settled in the sand. It's sunk. Weighed about 5 tons. And standing outside the craft, right in front of them, are the crew of 4. Okay? Not dead. They weren't women. There was no ray gun fight. That's one of the latest ones. But there was a ray gun fight. Yeah, I'm not kidding. And they were lightly built, 4.5 to 5 feet tall, pale, short, sandy colored cropped hair, and they were, and he was out of breath when he was telling me. He said they were human.
Right.
And he meant humanoid.
Right.
And yeah, the subtle, there were some differences. They're very subtle. You see that in our population, and
Right.
perhaps they're hybrids. I don't know, or perhaps it's just a variation, and it's quite normal to the species of man. But
Yeah.
the eyes, they didn't have large eyes like you see in a gray. Their eyes were slightly further apart, spaced
Right.
further apart, and the chin goes down from the jaw down to the chin is more heart-shaped, like a Valentine heart. And,
Right.
and that was
Well,
those
basically
were the things. Go ahead.
Well, what this individual's father told him was that they were basically a related form of human, but they weren't Homo sapiens, and that they believed that the brass basically believed that they had been around before we were, and that for some reason they had gone underground.
The Air Force man hadn't formed any opinion like that.
Right.
Okay. They were all stunned because in 1953, the things and coming up through into 1953, the things that were coming out in the early theaters with the early FX, it's like they fully expected. This was the first one for him, and he fully expected to see something with suckers on the end of its fingers and antenna coming out of its head, and so it threw them,
Right.
And the first thing they did, as they approached them, was trying to find out how they're going to handle these crew members because they can't leave them there. They're top secret. The whole thing is top secret. And this is something that I don't know why, but some of the people kind of missed that point. You can't leave aliens standing around for days waiting for a cab.
Right.
You have to do something with them. And as they approached, one of the 4 stepped in front of the other 3 and spoke. And what they thought was English, so they could understand it anyway. Whether or not they heard it with the auditory nerve or telepathically, I can't tell you, and either could he. He thought he heard it with his ears.
Right.
Okay? And what happened next is they were dispatched immediately. They actually sent a man out. At that point, there's 20 military police there. They're cordoning off the entire area, setting up a perimeter, because the whole site is top secret. And this is off of a 1912 wagon road. Okay?
Right.
And which is not much better than it probably was in 1912. I've been on it too many times. But they had to send a man out with a walkie-talkie because they had no communication there. They were blocked off because of hills and stuff in the way. And they sent someone out. He came right back. And then they were taken to Groom Lake. That's where they went. Later, it was called Area 51.
Right.
So that's how that happened. And then there was this problem with the Air Force, the recovery team there. They have to recover the craft. They don't want to damage it. It's fully intact. And for whatever reason, it won't fly. And it made even Arthur Stansel, who was to determine the forward motion and rate of fall. Forward motion, estimate of how fast it was going, and then the rate of fall. And he determined the rate of fall based on what the only thing I could use at the time is the depth of how deep in the ground the craft was, is how they developed the estimate of the collision speed with the ground. And so it's sitting there 20 inches into the sand. He has no idea because he was only on site there in the dark for 1 hour. And when he was taken out by bus on the 21st of May, 1953. And so he estimated rate of fall at 8 feet per second. Okay, everybody needs to know something here. And this is what I do when I talk at a conference or I'm on television or this kind of thing, and when I'm on radio, I want to be able to tell the listeners, the audience, I want to give you some things you can go check for yourself so that you can verify and be satisfied that what I'm telling you is backed up with facts. And there's some very simplistic things. The rate of fall, natural. You take a pencil and hold it out in front of you and let go of it. It begins its trip at 32 feet per second, not 8 feet per second. Okay, that means something's impeding the craft from coming down at a normal fall rate. And of course, it wasn't propelled down. It might have, it would be falling like a jet aircraft in a fatal, collision with the ground where it's under power. So, and this bothered Arthur Stancil. Even in his interview he did with Raymond Fowler, he expressed concern. He could not understand why the craft wasn't destroyed based on his calculations, and there were inconsistencies like in the rate of fall. This kind of stuff's going to drive people wacky listening to it, boring. It's like, whoa. But I have to look at everything I'm doing. And the analysis, the analytical part, this is part of the process of a professional. Right. When you're doing this, it isn't like I have a gut feeling, so I like this story, so I'm going to do this. And I've read all kinds of these things about what's happened to this craft. And to begin with, it didn't crash. It made a forced landing. Something involved in what we would think of as avionics happened to it. I know why. And because that's what happened to the other two. They weren't so fortunate to be able to make more of a soft landing. But I never expected any more than this one. And I thought I was done, except the Air Force man told me about another one. And the curator that I mentioned already knew, and he'd been looking for about 20 years for this other craft. And because it came from this man who counseled Area 51 workers from back in that time. And so even had the name and everything, but couldn't find it. I used on both of the main sites, the landing site and the next one that was a crash site on the 22nd. That's at Red Lake, Mojave, Arizona, Mohave, not Mojave, New Mexico. So everybody gets that. But it went down about 4 days later. During that 4-day gap of the one that landed and the crash that happened, the Air Force had to figure out how to get a hold of equipment because there was nothing in Kingman. And to be able to look at this problem, everybody needs to go back in time to 1953 because things were different then. There was only 2 roads in and out of Kingman, no matter what anybody writes, and it's on the out on the internet. There were only 2 roads. Now, they had this craft is supposedly taken down Highway 40 on the way to the Colorado River, across the bridge, over to Highway 95 in Nevada, and taken up north to Henderson and then Groom Lake. And, of course, there are some stories that was driven 2,600 miles all the way back to Ohio to Wright-Patterson, if you can imagine, taking down what there were for highways then, and you keep it secret, and you go that far, that's ridiculous. And then, but this other one is ridiculous because Highway 40 didn't exist for another 31 years. That's pretty simplistic. And I have like 6th grade girl and boy who can point out on a map, 1953 and 2014, and they can show you the difference. A 6th grader knows. And yet this stuff is being put out there that a UFO, they closed the Interstate 40 from Kingman all the way to Barstow, California. That's about 240 miles to go about, about 29 miles. And but the other problem was there was no bridge over the Colorado River where they say there was. And so there's some really basic things, and people can check that out for themselves very easily. Look at the stories being told. Take a look at a map. And find out when these roads were made. And that's something I did. I went back to 1856 and came forward in time. So I knew where all the roads were. There's a basic thing, so And there are things that today don't show up. I looked at things where even satellite imagery shows roads go back to 1918. So, it's just like you have to do some processing here. Anyway, they had to bring in equipment. Where are you going to get something to haul a 30-foot wide, 5-ton UFO? They didn't have anything. The military base, in spite of the stories, the military Army Air Corps base at Kingman closed in 1945. By June, the tower had been in disuse. All of the equipment in the tower at the Army Air Corps base was taken out, including the PIP screens, that's the radar, and they were taken out, and in typical military fashion, it was all put in a pile and destroyed. And then in August, the military abandoned the base, and then it was turned over to Mojave County, and the last part and the main runway in 1947, and it became, and is right now, the airport for the city of Kingman and Mojave County. And interestingly enough, the tower is a historic landmark. It's still there, but it's never been used. And there's a story about how an airman in 1953 was in the tower, and he saw the Kingman UFO on the PIP radar screen, and he looked out the window in the dark, and he saw the flash of it as exploded when it hit the ground. And interesting, because it came down, and he's saying the 21st, by the way, the 21st of May. It came down on the 18th in the afternoon, and it landed, made a forced landing. Within 2 hours, the Air Force was with the craft. And it's like, hello, 15 residents saw it. I've got 42 witnesses, old-timers, okay? And then I have 3 witnesses at the site who touched this thing. They don't know each other. They weren't there at the same time. That's pretty interesting. That's more and more convincing to me. And then one who examined it at what we call Area 51. Because this is the UFO that it's the basis for the entire Area 51 UFO story. This is It's it.
Well,
go ahead.
Have you ever encountered? I know that you probably think that you've seen a lot of disinformation, and people do kind of, they say, well, this is now settled. We believe this is what happened with this, and then this was this, because we've all come to a consensus. But that can really get in the way of really finding out what happened. But at the same time, have you ever gotten the feeling that maybe that you were stepping on some toes, that someone was trying to derail what you were uncovering, that type of thing?
I'm not sure I caught all of what you're asking me.
What I'm asking you is, have you experienced interference as you've gotten closer to what the truth is about the Kingman crash?
Well, I will say this. I went along saying Kingman crashed at first like everyone else until I had an opportunity to do the interviews and to start looking at stuff. But I'll tell you something. What changed the rules of the hunt was I was doing an interview, and I was given a landmark. And whether anyone ever listened to that and acted on it, I don't think so. I know so, because between what this witness told me and what Arthur Stansel told Raymond Fowler in an interview in 1973, there was something very unique that gelled between the two things. And I went out because I've been studying the roads here. Trust me, there's a lot of side roads out in the desert, and you could spend a life trying to find something. But I had nothing. There was no needle to look for in the haystack. It was just like an invisible place somewhere out here is a landing site or a crash site. And when I got the landmark, and the day I found the landmark, I went a little further with my Jeep to exactly the place that Arthur Stansel described, turned off and pulled right up in front of the field kitchen for the Air Force encampment that was exactly the way it was, like I had arrived the day after they left. 60 years had gone by, and what they left behind is there right now. It is an archaeological site.
Right.
Yeah. So, and it's datable. The relics are datable. You see, and they even built for the field kitchen. They even built some Dutch ovens. Now, it's something we wouldn't do now. We'd come in with a lot of other things, or move in some metal prop-up type of things with gas burners or whatever. This is 1953. It's just after the Korean War. And so they have whatever they have. They were dependent on getting things from Camp Irwin, which had been a U.S. infantry training center and had just switched in 1951 to armor. And that's how they got their hands on an M25 tank transporter to be able to move the UFO. And they loaded it on a train at Barstow, or actually Yermo, next to Barstow, California, and it was taken to Kingman, 4 miles south of Kingman. It was offloaded and then drove through one of the only 2 roads that you could possibly use at Kingman to get to the other side of what was called then Old AZ-93, which was a graded road to Wikia. And then after that, it was a wagon road to Wickenburg. If you know anything about terrain here, there was no Highway 93 like there is now. And of course, there was no Highway 40. So this is how these things happen. And then all the other heavy lift things that were necessary to move that craft had to be taken to the site. And then it was never taken imaginarily down Highway 40, which didn't exist. They went around the north side of Kingman. They used 2 sand roads, packed sand roads, which I've driven myself, that parallel Old 93 going north, and came out just before Boulder Dam, where the Army Corps of Engineers was waiting with a barge on the back side of the dam, and they barged it right across, and off it went to Groom Lake. Pretty simple.
Now, Harry, how many people were involved in the actual retrieval?
Oh, I haven't any idea, because there was a lot. I mean, there was enough. Yeah. There's a bivouac area there. You know, probably 40 people. I would guess. Mm-hmm. The retrieval team is 8 people, but you know, the retrieval team isn't going to be doing something, or it's like 20 military police. They're not going to be out there, you know, trying to pick up a UFO. They brought in people that know how to run the equipment. Nellis sent down some medical people. Okay, I don't know what their function is, but I know that they went there.
Well, now, what were the crew doing while the craft were being retrieved?
The crew were gone.
Yeah, the four of the aliens.
The 4 crew members were taken to Groom Lake. After that, the Air Force retrieval team, when they handed it off at the back of Boulder Dam, they're done with it. What happens next is none of their business.
So the crew was whisked away long before they actually managed to move the craft out of the site.
They were out of Mohave County, and they were at Groom Lake before the sunset. They were gone.
Wow.
Yeah. And, you know, it's like, it's about 80 miles to Boulder, the Boulder Dam. Okay? An M25 tank transporter can pack 40 tons, and that affects its fuel efficiency. It has a 120-gallon tank, and cutting straight across the desert is shorter distance than trying to drive on the road where everybody sees what you're doing. And the roads, I've driven it, and they're straight and flat, and they're packed like concrete. And so 28 miles an hour to 28 to 35 miles an hour, but they're rated at 28. And you have to go basically under 80 miles. You know, they had it out of here and up there and handed off to go across the back of the dam. And they had water in the dam then, whereas it's been severely used now with all of the various things that have happened over 60 years as far as how much water is being used, like taken to California and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
now, when you were at the site, can you tell? Are there still markings on the ground and where the craft had landed? Can you?
Yeah, it's easy. It's easy. Yeah, it's easy to see. And there was, so everybody understands, because I've been misquoted I don't know how many times. There was a low-level radiation still there. It's no big deal. It's about 5 times background. You move away from it 60 feet or so, and it drops back to normal. I parked my Jeep where the bus parked. There's a cut turnaround for the bus so it could turn around, because this bus can't back up. I mean, this is, it's not a 4-wheel drive bus. This thing weighed 17,000 pounds. And then everybody was loaded. So you added about 8,000 pounds. It's driving on rayon tires with inner tubes. It's low to the ground, and it's driving on a pretty much flat dirt road coming out. Highway 90, old AZ 93 was a graded dirt road. That's what it drove on. And so it's like, you make good time, but you're not going to be driving like, well, this bus couldn't do that anyway, but you couldn't be doing 70.
Now, you say that there were witnesses from the town, 15 witnesses?
15, well, it's probably more than that, but a lot of people have passed away,
Yes.
Yeah. 15 witnesses, 15 resident witnesses saw that craft. This has nothing to do with 2 of them were physicists who were out at the craft and touched this craft. I mean, they didn't just go, gee, that's a nice shiny thing. They actually were looking at it, and the 40 people aboard the bus were scientists and specialists, and each had an area of expertise. They were told by the Air Force that they were going out to inspect a super secret Air Force aircraft. And then, even for 1953, I'm really suspect. It's like, why didn't they just take them to the hangar to look at it instead of out in the desert? What's so special about this that it's got to be examined in situ, where exactly where it was sitting when it was found? So that's highly suspect. And the fellow, Arthur Stancil, didn't realize that this is 1953. The government says up is up. You go, okay, it's up. And when, in fact, a lot of times it was down. This kind of thing. Left is right, depending on your perspective of government. People trusted government emphatically in 1953. Kingman was a very much controlled population, essentially martial law here. During World War II, there was a training facility, and after that, the patriotism that was intense here, along with being conditioned for years in what would be martial law, if they had a UFO land in their front yard and they were told not to say anything, they would not. They would never say anything, and they do not talk to They don't talk to outsiders pretty much now, the ones that have survived. And so, with all of that said, the people thought they were looking at a super secret airplane, and Arthur Stancil had gone back to Ohio for a little time off, and he went to a drive-in theater, and they show newsreels back then, because you couldn't tune to any particular channel on television because there was no TV like here, and barely any phone. This was Mayberry, USA, 3,400 people. And he's back there, and he's at a drive-in, and he's looking at newsreels. And here is the colonel who boarded the bus and gave them the secrecy oath as they're leaving. And what is the colonel there on the film about? Blue Book. And then it dawned on him. He'd been working for Blue Book for a week. Doing a report after he saw it and all of that. And it was a UFO, and that's why he couldn't understand anything about it when he was looking at it. And nobody was allowed to talk to each other. There was repeatedly some attempts and all of that. And if you look, I have from the Mojave Historian from 1978, data and an annotated copy of this. It's a 65-page interview and report done by Raymond Fowler, and it's annotated where they called and talked to Fowler, and he makes notations on the document that I have, so that it answers questions about, like, if you didn't quite understand something, then it's all handwritten in. So kind of handy that way as evidence. I have literally thousands of documents, and I have hundreds of hours of video that I've shot, and stills, photos, including the site. It needs to be handed off for fenced out. It's an archaeological site. I didn't take anything from there. Nobody's taken anything from there. It should be left alone, and studied.
So
That's
you
what
don't
happens.
think you don't think the government's gone in there and gone over the place with the fine-tooth comb?
Say it again, please.
I said you don't think the government has gone into that site and gone through it with a fine-tooth comb?
Oh, of course they did.
But they did that a long time ago.
Yes.
Okay.
And then they left. And they left things, and they buried things. The problem was it's a very long, wide, gently falling drain field. And it exposed things in 60 years. And I have photos. The first thing I found is like an area with debris that's 40 feet by 30 feet wide. And the things are dateable, and I've already done that. And they're strictly under government contract, made in 1951, 1952, and there are hundreds of those, and that makes plenty of sense for what they were doing, So, but I have a problem with that, and the next one is the Red Lake Foo Tank being like Foo Fighter, but it has nothing to do with it. That's an Arizona expression back then, and it has to do with describing a dirt or earthen dam to hold back rainwater and snowmelt for livestock. If you create a reservoir with a dirt dam, Foo Tank. And it was watched by 12 people, 11 of them with rancher Leonard Neal, who came up from the Big Sandy in the late 1800s. There's a large number of people here who are related to the Neals. They're cousins, a lot of them, lot. And they thought the craft, the rate of fall on the craft was such that it didn't quite clear a rocky butte, a big rocky butte, and it hit it and ricocheted off of it, overshot the reservoir, went 0.21 miles, and slammed into the desert floor. That was watched, but they thought it went in the reservoir. A small convoy of military came up, including some of the recovery team who hadn't been back from Boulder Dam very long. And they were told Leonard Ray, the rancher, offered to take them over. It's his property. And they said, no, all of you go back in your homes and stay there. And
nothing to see here, guys.
Yeah.
Now,
but listen.
Now, Harry, why do you think that these craft were coming down? They weren't being shot down. Why all of a sudden these objects are coming down?
Okay, here it is. This is Cold War era. Korean War is just over. Rumor has it that the Russians, interesting how things come back around again, the Russians are building a bomber they call the Bear, and it will be nuclear capable of making a flight over the pole that could make a surprise attack on the United States. The problem we had was ground radar range was still 25 miles. The only way you could increase the distance of radar, if you wanted to double the distance, you had to double the power. It was microwave, short pulse, radiation for the radar beam, and there was no modulation or frequency controls then, so every pulse that came out of the radar was a different frequency. And so they had set up 3 radar and they didn't plan it this way. Their idea was to boost radar as much as they can, while back east they're developing a new radar system so that it can see further. The Navy did better over the water. They were getting 45 miles, but on ground, 25. And so they were boosting as much as they could, and they were trying to achieve 150 miles, which seems pretty paltry when you think about the idea of a Russian bomber with atomic bombs in it coming at you, and you can only see 125 or 150 miles. But this is what they were doing. They were set up in a triangular position. One is at what we still call Radar Hill, right in Old Town Kingman, and it can be seen everywhere from Old Town. And then the other was east of town. Between those 2 radar units is where the Kingman UFO that made the forced landing went through. And then the other is on the east side along the base of the mountains of Red Lake. And what you have here is a triangular configuration of 3 overpowered radar systems that the locals were complaining about flocks of birds being killed, knocked right out of the sky by these things when they switched them on. And one morning they switched them on, and it's right smack where there's a flyway. It's right now, still, and then. And when I say a flyway, it's for UFOs. That's what they were using. And we still have them. They're seen here. You know, I have a friend on the other side of Kingman who's an astronomer. And there's some amazing things that I've photographed with a still camera that he got with a telescope and video. You know, and you get 20 minutes of the same thing I've got, but he's from an angle. You know, it's amazing stuff. But anyway, so the craft flew into this. You're talking about HARP right here. And the Air Force had no way. They didn't have the technology to even measure what they're doing. And I've done checks to determine how many of the operators, and then there was an operator who sat there tuning dials and watching an oscilloscope screen to try to keep the signal flat while the technicians kept trying to boost the power. But there was no military presence other than just a few guys at each one of these systems.
Right.
Yeah, and
well, you know, for years that's been the rumors that radar brought these things down. That our rudimentary, crude form of radar was something that they had never encountered before, and it messed up their navigation or something in their control system.
At least for a while.
These are not first off, you know, people say, well, it can't be. And I know from a presentation in Italy, I had one person going, oh, this can't be. And I said, well, you know what? 5 cell phones turned on and a 737 can disengage the autopilot.
Yep.
And you're not even using the phone. It's just on. And, you know, I say, oh, I can't believe that. Well, I'll tell you, it's been renewed again for 2014. You can't go into a commercial jet, which isn't hardened, and turn on and leave your cell phones on or run a lot of different things, but cell phones. And in June of last year, there was a lady who was arrested and taken off an American Airlines flight before it took off because she refused to turn her phone off. So, yeah, take it serious. You know, it's like if they tell me to turn off my phone, I'll turn it off because I don't want to have the landing gear go up when I'm still sitting on the tarmac. You know, that kind of thing.
And tonight we're talking with Harry Drew about the Kingman UFO incident. And I want to remind our listeners that you're listening to The Outer Edge, and that you can call us if you have any questions. We encourage you to call in at 786-245-8127. You can also like us on Facebook. That's facebook.com, The Outer Edge Radio. And you can also join us in our chat room at psn-radio.com. You can chat live during the show. So, Harry, I wanted to ask you. We were talking about the possibility that these craft had been brought down by the radar that they were using in the area, and like Mike Mott had pointed out earlier. that had been implicated in, say, like the Roswell crash and other UFO incidents.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that a lot of people nowadays just kind of like shake their heads and say, "Oh, well, that's how could radar bring make something as sophisticated, supposedly, as an extraterrestrial craft out of the sky?" But as you pointed out, I mean, it's not that difficult.
Right.
Well, we're talking about crafts that are atmospheric. These weren't designed. They aren't like a military aircraft or the military version of a UFO, if there's such a thing, right? Mm-hmm. And where it's hardened. And these guys have been flying along on their UFOs. These are shuttles used around the planet, and they land in places like we land planes out on aircraft carriers. They land the saucers or whatever the names best suit these things. They land them either in an underground base, because they can't leave them sitting out, and or they land in a mothership. That's an aircraft carrier. I mean, it's how I would visualize it. But they're not hardened, and so for us, it's kind of like it affected the avionics. If a cell phone will do it.
I mean, if they've been zipping around our skies for millennia, or even just a few centuries, and all of a sudden we invent this new thing, radar, which interferes with their equipment. I mean, that's not something they necessarily would have seen coming. It would have been a surprise to them when it knocked them out of the sky, just like it was a surprise to us.
It did something, and I don't profess to know that. I would need the craft. I'd love to have one, but I don't have access, but it affected something either in the propulsion system or in the control system, the avionics of the thing, and they went down. And the crash at Red Lake, if they could have been about 8 to 10 feet higher, they would have missed the top of the butte. And this butte is like rock. I mean, it's really rock. And when they hit it, they left a scar. And the craft went 0.21 miles, overshot the reservoir called Futank, and slammed into the desert floor. It gutted the front lower part of the craft out when it hit the rocks, and you can see where I've been up to it, and not recommended because of Mojave Green's there. It's a rattlesnake that has venom of a rattlesnake, and much like a cobra as well. But you can see where it hit. It pushed the rock, bulldozed the rock, and then up. It went forward and then up and blew it out as it ricocheted off of it. And it tore the craft up. There were 4 in the crew. 2 of the crew had severe lower extremity injuries. They were taken to Nellis, where they died. Now you have 2 deceased aliens. Okay, there's a place for this to go, because other things happen later where we're talking about how many aliens were taken out of this area, supposedly. And it's the right number, just so happens. But the other 2 were roughed up, but they were taken on to Groom. That meant there were 6 living aliens that had been taken to Groom Lake at a facility that they were being used, putting together for down discs. They had been operating and working on the facility, by the way, when I say the United States Air Force, Edwards Air Force Base. It was an annex to Edwards. They acquired it in 1951. They used black budget money. And what did they acquire? An Army Air Corps base. That's what was there. And they just ran with it. They're not going to wait around for Congress to give them a budget for it, which they finally got in 1955 to operate. They have other funds, and I don't have a problem with that. They've really done incredible things that make life safer for us here now. So all of this happened, and so so basically getting the craft out of there at Red Lake was almost like a garbage truck kind of thing, because it was so smashed up. And they had to screen, walk along and listen for metal in the ground and that type of thing. where the crafts hit. You can see where it augured right along, and then came to a stop. There's still bottom rock turned up where they were digging to get it out. And it's interesting because nothing grows there. Very, very interesting, because that's not the only place that I've found that. Nothing grows at the site. Why? I can't tell you. And I've done soil porosity tests and a lot of different things, and I'm not coming up with an answer as to why the soil's very alkaline. And why? And that just in that place, you see. So, but with all of that said, that was the 22nd day, and we just jumped past the 21st of May, which was when the bus came out. And I want to back up for a second so everyone can understand something here and find another thing that dovetails that's a little spooky when you're doing this and you find these things the way I have. And part of the discovery is elation. That's some of the reward for a historian, and also a little spooky when things come together like this, because there are another 8 UFOs involved in this, and they're on the 21st, and you have to look at the fact that the Air Force and support people from Camp Irwin and everybody are out with the UFO trying to get it up off the ground and get it onto a 38-foot long trailer that goes on the back of an M25 tank transporter. It's 10 a.m. on the morning of the 21st. The bus will come out about 8:30 or 9 p.m., dark, okay, quarter moon, the whole thing. And there are 3 men southeast of the landing site over towards Del Rio Springs, over towards Prescott, Arizona. Not all that far if you shoot a straight line, but nobody knows about the other person. They don't. The Air Force doesn't know about these guys. These guys don't know anything about that there's a down disk someplace, and they're going out for something they're running for youth, a sporting thing for fishing, like a derby, and they're checking things to get ready for it. And one of them looks up, and there are 8 UFOs, disks. One on each side is hovering, and the other 6 are doing dogfight maneuvers. They watched it for over an hour. Who are these people? One is the editor for the paper at Prescott, the Courier. 2 of them are pilots. One of them that is a pilot is a former World War II combat pilot who has a contract with the United States Air Force to train fighter pilots at 3 air bases in Arizona. This is all on the front page of the newspaper at Prescott. And they're talking. They watched it for over an hour. This is the day that the bus would come. The bus came much later. Nobody in Kingman knows a thing about what was in the paper in Prescott unless somebody had brought one over later, and came out on the 22nd of May, the day after the fact. And that was the other thing. Nobody here knew anything about Roswell. Nothing. In fact, 5 days after Roswell, and this is like right in the newspaper, and there's actually it's a radio shack. They didn't use the tower anymore. A radio shack is like a 1-story small building with the radios and antennas outside and all of that. And they talked to a pilot who was coming in from Las Vegas. There were 2 businessmen in it, and they were coming in to land at the Kingman Airport. And they were 500 feet off the ground when they were set upon by flying discs. 5 days after Roswell, we had 2 people who, this is like in the newspaper. Okay? 1947, the 7th day. The next day it happens in Prescott, flying discs, and everybody's seeing them. So, which I think is interesting, because some of my research also took me to the point where at Roswell, the Air Force denies the day after that it was a flying saucer, and it wasn't this, and it wasn't that, it was a balloon, and all these things. And I found from an official representing the United States Air Force who made an official release on AP in 1947 conceding, saying, yes, there were flying saucers. And the problem the military had was that they had insufficient resources to be able to set up to detect where they all were. And this was in 1947. So that's an admission. Nobody ever seems to talk about that. You know, it's like it's a denial. But, or maybe they just want us to forget that. But, so from 1947 on up, Kingman was having problems, and these two guys were able to land and get out of the Piper Cub and basically kiss the ground. And then the local reporter was called to come and do a story. And, you know, he'd get on the phone and call Joe, and he came out with his pencil and pad, and they wouldn't talk to him. They didn't want nothing to do with him. But the communications back and forth on the radio were jotted down, okay, which is kind of interesting. So these guys thought they were going to die. That's what they really thought. And they were going to get rammed by these flying saucers. So, but back up to 1953, and it's not modern. It's Mayberry, USA, and the public doesn't, but people had seen it, like with Leonard Neal. 12 people watched this thing go down, and everything seemed cool. They keep their mouth shut, and then 2 days later, on the 24th, people in Old Town Kingman watch a disc come down and slam into the north face of the Wallapai Mountain, which is, it didn't hit the top, it hit down lower in the north face. This mountain is big. It's 8,256 feet high. Looks like the Rockies right here, you know, stands up out of the desert. And it sets the forest on fire because it's timbered. It has elk and all of this. It had a logging mill up there in 1953. And so everyone is like scurrying around like a Chinese fire drill trying to get stuff to head up there. And the technology to fight a fire, if you ever want to see it, watch a movie called War of the Worlds with Gene Barry, it's a George Fowle production, 1953.
Oh, yeah.
And there's if you can stop and look at the stuff, you'll see 1953 firefighting techniques early on, and they're absolutely accurate. And they used tubs of water with gunny sacks they soaked with water to pound the grass fire part of it, and backpack tanks with a pump handle on a hose to the front. And that was the technology, and then a bulldozer if they could get one up there. There was no aircraft involved. Pumper trucks couldn't get into these places, you know, like you think about how things are now. They didn't have all that. And so they got this going on, and there's a Forest Service worker that goes up, and he's taking more things up to help the fire crew, and the fire's getting bigger. And it's like front page news for over a week in a daily. And the Forest Service worker looks over where the source of the fire is, and there's these two individuals, and they're aimlessly wandering around like they're confused, they're lost. And what they don't know is on the other side of the fire, the Air Force is dragging away two bodies and pieces of wreckage, but they're beyond the flames and all of that because the fire is getting bigger. The Air Force had to leave. They couldn't stay there because the mountains was just spreading. This flame was spreading. So the Forest Service worker looks at these two guys, and he becomes very suspicious. They don't belong there. They don't, they aren't dressed right. They don't look right. And he goes over and he takes them into custody. And there's a newspaper reporter from the Kingman Daily Miner there, and he's got his little pencil that he wets with his tongue, and he writes on a little notepad, and he's following. He sees this going on, and they go by him, and he writes down, Forest Service worker Joe, and he's got these quote, two strange-looking men, unquote. Okay, that's the description right on the front page of the paper. And they take them, the Forest Service worker takes them down to the Mojave County Sheriff's Office. It's in the basement on the northwest end of the building. It's below grade. That means below the surface of the ground. There are no windows, none. No openings of any kind. And the Sheriff's Office, to get into the Sheriff's Office, you have to pass through two separate alarmed independent locked doors. And then they had 3 to 4 deputies inside. And the Forest Service worker shows up with these two guys. He thinks they're arsons because there was no lightning storms, nothing that entire week. Weather reports, I checked them, go back to 1908 here as far as the weather officially. And then the newspaper did a synopsis, which confirms it, in spite of stories that the Kingman UFO was knocked down by a lightning strike. It was not. But anyway, so these two strange-looking men are taken into the sheriff's office. The sheriff's not in. It's like Mayberry, he's off someplace. And so they send a deputy out, and they have two detention rooms that are concrete vaults. They're steel-reinforced, solid concrete, including the ceilings. These things are like, they're like vaults, and one door in and out. That's it, and it's locked. And so later they were called what they were. They were interrogation rooms, and so they took the two strange-looking men and put them in the room and locked the door. The Forest Service worker sat down on an oak bench outside the door. 3 deputies waited inside, and the newspaper reporters stood outside trying to get information, and they wouldn't tell them anything. And the sheriff is brought back, and the sheriff is briefed by the Forest Service worker, and he tells the deputy to open the door. The deputy unlocks the door, and the sheriff steps in, the Forest Service worker steps in, the deputy steps in, and they look around the room, including under the only table in the room, which just has legs, and the room is empty. There's nobody there.
And this was reported in the local newspaper.
And the newspaper used the reporter used the term vanished.
Wow.
Yeah, and you know what? The law enforcement keep records. They can't have people in for questioning who just disappear. Okay? So it's like, but let me tell you, because I went back to 1940 and doing research and went from 1940 to 1955. I want to know what's going on here, and as a historian, the only way I can get a feel for this, how life was back then, is go back there as much as I can mentally and look at everything and go see things physically that exist still today so that I get more and more connected to that time. And something really stands out to me, and it's the sheriff. Once they see this happens, and they're in the room and there's nobody there, the two strange-looking men, 2 of the crew from the craft, of which 2 others died, which now means there were 4 dead aliens. And in Richard Hall's book in 1988, Uninvited Guests, he talks about 4 aliens coming from Arizona, packed in dry ice to Wright-Patterson. And by the way, the stories usually said 3 aliens from Kingman area and from Arizona came in 1953, packed in dry ice, and those were actually 1973 from New Mexico. So I mean, it's like how people don't write down exactly the way things are. It drives historians really crazy, because if somebody says something wrong 400 years ago, and everybody copies that guy, what we do is when we're in school or when we're looking up stuff and what we think are credible places, we're looking at a story that was wrong 400 years ago. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So we have that going on in our own lifetime. It's fed by the internet. It's unbelievable. I mean, the stuff that comes up. But to me, so here you have the police report. The police report. They have these guys, and the newspaper guy's there because he followed them along with the Forest Service worker. He wants to know what's going on. He thinks he's got more to the story, and he's right. But it wasn't about arsons like he was thinking, just like the Forest Service worker. These guys somehow left. They either, these aren't the droids you want, right. And had them open the door, or they passed through the concrete wall on a beam of particles or something. I mean, I don't know what happened. I can't tell you. I can tell you that the sheriff did something different this time that he didn't do before, because this happened before, and that's what my research gave me, and it's a shock. He didn't do anything. It's like he turned to the Forest Service worker in 1953 and he said, "What are you doing for dinner?"
Yeah.
Okay? He didn't say, "Close off the building, issue an
Right.
APB." There's only 2 roads in and out of Kingman in 1953. Close the roads, call the state police, do something, because the next place is like going to be a long ways off and there's no way you could get away. But you know what? In 1950, 1 mile from where the disc crashed on the 24th of May, 1 mile from there, in June of 1950, another disc went down before it, the 1953 one. And there were 5. And there was a vehicle. And they said, first they said it was an ambulance. Then they said, no, it kind of looked like an ambulance. And then pretty soon they're saying, I think it might have been an ambulance. But all 5, there were 3, and they were picked up by 2 that claimed to be connected to an ambulance. The 3 were brought in by a National Guard captain, and there was because of the fire, and they were supposedly burned, and he helped load one in the back of the truck. And he put the other 2 crew, the other strange-looking men got in the cab with him, and they drove into Kingman, and they could see the hospital, which was torn down, by the way, about 2 years ago. They could see it ahead, and this one strange-looking man by the door said to the captain, "That looks like our ambulance." And you have to think about this. They're coming to the hospital. There's no such thing as ER. There's no other hospital closer than Las Vegas, okay? About 125 miles away. And so the captain was suspicious somewhat, and he acts like he's about half inebriated, and he got out. He told the guys to wait in the truck, and he walked up to the ambulance, and he leaned over where the driver's sitting, and he said, "Who are you?" And he said, "Well, I'm the ambulance driver." And the captain looked over at the man sitting over by the passenger door, and he said, "Well, who are you?" And he said, "Well, I'm the intern, and I take care of the people when they're in the ambulance." And he said, "Okay." So he helped load the one body or whatever it was in the back of what looked like an ambulance, and the other 2 got in the ambulance, and he drove away from the hospital. And they left. And then the same sheriff from 1953, Frank Porter, screeches up to a dead stop with a patrol car, and he said, "Did you just bring 3 men down off the mountain?" And he said, "Yeah," and they just went that way in the ambulance. And the sheriff is saying, "Why did they leave the hospital?" And so he put an APB out, he sealed the town, everything, and they vanished off the face of the earth.
Wow.
What are you going to do with that?
You have the sheriff's name. Have you done an interview with him? Have you taped an interview, or?
The sheriff, the sheriff was not quiet about this. When he went out with the undersheriff the day after they went through the town with a whole bunch of equipment all night long, big rumbling military stuff headed off to try to get stuff over to the site, and there was no way they could sneak that stuff, right through the middle of Old Town Kingman. And so they went out, and they went out to where I went, and they came up on the road was blocked, the military police. He argued with them for 15 minutes trying to get through. They wouldn't let him through to talk to anybody, commanding officer or not, period. Wouldn't let him through. And he didn't make that a secret. Family knows that. I heard from family as late as 2011.
So you were saying that you had heard that this had actually happened before, where someone in custody had disappeared.
Say that again.
Is that what you said previously, that the sheriff acted as if this had happened before?
1950. There were 5. He did everything different in 1950. It was like 1953 when the 2 strange men who were locked in a concrete vault. By the way, the head of security for the court, I went in, and I didn't say, "Well, I'm doing stuff on UFOs." They'd say, "Okay, leave." I went in and I said, "If I tell you a story from documentation that I've acquired, and I describe to you the interior, the building still exists. It's been closed off to the public for 30 years. The lower part of the building is used by the court for trial business, and it's all confidential. So that, this stuff is safe and it's handled and isn't, nobody can get at it and change anything." the court watches over that and does the work. And they use, believe it or not, they use the detention rooms, and they can close the door, and they're concrete vaults. And I described the interior of the 1953 Sheriff's Office, which is in a historic 1914 courthouse that still exists. It's on the National Register of Historic Sites. And so I described it to him, and I said, if I'm right, tell me yes, and if I'm not, would you please tell me no? And so he nodded, and he agreed to my terms. And I told him, and he sat there for a second after I was done, and then he got up out of his chair, and he said, come with me. And he unlocked the first door, turned off the alarm, and unlocked the first door, and then turned the alarm back on, went to the second door. I was in the sheriff's office, and there was the oak bench the Forest Service worker sat on, right next to the door. And he allowed me to photograph in the building, in the room where the two strange-looking men vanished off the face of the earth. And I can tell you without any reservation whatsoever, there's no way out of that room. It's concrete, steel-reinforced concrete, ceilings, walls, floor, and it's all below the ground level outside. So if you could get out, it'd be 8 feet down below the dirt.
That's interesting too.
So,
Harry, unfortunately, I'm going to have to stop us here because we are out of time.
Yeah.
Harry, though, give your website. I know you have a website, so let people know what it is.
www.kingmanufocrashes.com. You can also find me on Facebook at harry.drew.35.
Harry, are you going to be giving any talks or anything in the near future that you'd like people to know about?
I'm going to be at the Artists and Authors Pavilion in Old Town Kingman from the 14th through the 16th of this month for the International Route 66 Festival. And by the way, the magazine, which is a slick, oversized, really nice, they did their first UFO thing, and it's me and my story.
Very cool.
I got to get a copy of that. I want to get a copy of that. This is the best UFO story we've heard in ages, and
there's way more.
And your research is impeccable.
Yeah,
I have to applaud your research.
It's funny how many researchers does it take to investigate Roswell? That's kind of the new Polish joke, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I was on this 6 years. I funded it myself, and this kind of thing. I mean, all the tests and everything else. And like I did mention to you, I had the man who built the ROV flight control system for the Mariana Trench Dive stop work and come and drive a drone for me with 6 cameras on it, so I could get aerials of landing and crash sites, so I could determine exactly which way things were going.
One last question. Do you have any video interviews with any of these people, the witnesses, while they were still living?
I do.
You do?
Oh, yeah, of course. All of that goes... I'm already making arrangements with a museum for my materials to go to a museum. Mm-hmm.
Well, let us release some of this to the public or those interested in the subject at some point.
I have a new DVD coming out called 7 Days in May, the Kingman UFO story, and I will include tidbits and bits and pieces. It's just you can only get so much in an hour and 8 minutes or whatever.
You bet.
So, yeah.
Wonderful. Very good.
All right.
Good.
Well,
thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Most interesting.
Thanks,
yes, Harry, you're going to have to come back on again. Yeah, you're going to have to come back on again sometime, Harry. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Well, gentlemen,
that was a great show, guys.
Yeah, very good.
Good show, right? Serious research. They can't accuse us of being entirely frivolous.
That's right. That's right. Well, guys, I'm going to have to shut us down here. We're a little bit over our time. So everyone out there, thank you for listening. You were listening to Harry Drew, and we're going to have him back on again sometime because I have the feeling that we just scratched the surface of his investigation.
I think so.
All right. So for Mike Mott and Timothy Green Beckley, I'm Tim Swartz. You have been listening to The Outer Edge. thank you very much for listening. Have a great week, and we will see you again next time. So everyone take care.
Don't forget Mr. UFO's Secret Files on YouTube. Get some of these interviews live on the air.
That's right. All right, gentlemen. Thank you, and good night.